So there's a multitude of sleep problems, certainly pain. If you don't have adequate pain management, that's going to interfere with sleep. But here's a diagnosis I had never seen before as a primary diagnosis. It actually came from the sleep center. One of my patients had been referred by their family physician for a sleep study. Well, at the end of these sleep studies, at the end of the night, people are taken off the wires and so forth. And they're always asked, well, so estimate for us, how much sleep do you think you got last night? And this one patient of mine told them, are you kidding? That was obnoxious. All these wires and so forth. I don't know, like 3.5 hours of sleep. He was pretty grumpy. And they asked him, how many times would you say that you actually woke up, fully awakened throughout the night? He said, like 8 or 9 times. Well, all the sonography and EEG recordings suggested he didn't get 3.5 hours of sleep. He actually got 5.5. He didn't wake up officially 9 times. He only woke up, according to the EEG recordings, twice. So it's not the only answer, but we have to be very cautious because, as we all know, without adequate sleep, it's going to affect our emotional reactivity, and that can affect, actually, our self-report measures of how we're doing. So just a word of warning. Now, I'm not talking about central sleep apnea. This is obstructive sleep apnea. It's defined as any time you have a complete obstruction of airway for more than 10 seconds, or for more than 10 seconds, you have at least a 50% reduction in the airway that results in at least a 4 percentage point drop in your oxygen saturation rate. That would be referred to as a hypopneic episode. Now, who's the person who tends to be dragging these patients into the sleep center? It's their bed partner, right? Why? Because it's associated with very loud snoring, and when the body kind of is able to kind of get through that obstruction and actually get air, it is a dramatic gasping for air that you often hear. So it's going to result, obviously, in awakenings throughout the night and excessive daytime sleepiness. But the interesting data here is how prevalent of a problem is this? AHI stands for Apnea Hypopnea Index. That means if you have 10 seconds or more either partial or total obstruction, that's going to count as 1. It turns out in one study that they looked just at people under the age of 60, this happened for 15% of the men at least 10 times an hour. And 5% of the women had 10 or more such episodes in any given hour. Now, a separate study, but a community sample, not one of a sleep center, but in a random digit dialing of community members, they found that over 65, you have more than 2 out of 3 men, 70% of men, and more than half of the women over the age of 65 are having these episodes fairly frequently. So it's a kind of a surprise of how much this might be contributing to the fatigue and worn out feelings we have later in the day. A couple of risk factors, certainly ones you can't do anything about, age and gender. But obesity, being just 15% over ideal body weight, increases significantly your risk of obstructive sleep apnea. That's not necessarily true for central apnea. Smokers absolutely are at increased risk of these problems, and people who have their nightcap, they want to have half a glass of wine to help them get in the mood for sleep. Well, it turns out that that's going to be basically relaxing the muscles of your airway. When you lay down, that's going to interfere with adequate airflow. And so what tends to happen with alcohol is not only sleep apnea, but it will result in awakenings about 90 to 120 minutes after you fall asleep. So the consequences are severe sleepiness throughout the day, and it begins this, or exacerbates, an inflammatory process. Not only vascular inflammation, which can cause contribute to fatigue, but also the immunologic effects. Now, I want to draw your attention to a study done by Sheldon Cohen in 2009. Dr. Cohen is an international expert in psychoneuroimmunology, and his focus has been for the last 20 years on the common cold, the stress and the propensity to contract the common cold. Now, his paradigm is he brings people in and has them fill out questionnaires. He stresses them out in a variety of ways, and then he shoves a virus up their nose and watches them get sick. How sick, right? Well, it turns out in this study, one of the very few, where he actually didn't stress anybody out, but he had them basically fill out a very detailed sleep diary for every night in the prior month. And then they come in, have a virus shoved up their nose, and they get sick. What's important is that it's not so much how much sleep you got the night before exposure to the virus. What predicted more how sick you got was whether you got adequate sleep the 30 days before. Less than 6.5 hours on average, you invariably got sick. More than 7.5 on average for a month, you were very unlikely to have and report symptoms of the flu. And then a mixed bag between 6.5 and 7.5. But important, it's not, oh, I got a bad night's sleep, I'm susceptible to the flu. That's not really how it works. Study out of Case Western just this spring. They looked at women who had an especially aggressive form of breast cancer. Turns out that when they looked at the sleep that these women got prior to diagnosis, and interestingly enough, not for women who are premenopausal, but only for women postmenopausal, if you average less than 6 hours of sleep a night, your recurrence of breast cancer within 5 years was much higher than, again, if you average quality 7.5, 8 hours of sleep. Remember, OR is odds ratio. Your mortality nearly doubles in the next 15 years if you chronically have sleep problems. All other things being equal, month after month, year after year, you're nearly doubling the likelihood of death in the next decade or two. It's obviously associated with depression, that is sleep disorders, sleep problems. Cause or consequence, it's not real clear, but certainly impaired cognitive function.